Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Nathan, and in today's video we are covering the changes to the Druid class in the 2024 Player's Handbook. Now, Druid is one of my favorite classes and they are very versatile and very powerful. However, at least in the 2014 edition, they had a lot of potential power level issues, and some of that was due to spells, some of that was due to their class features, as well as they're a very complex and relatively hard to understand class. So let's jump into what's changed in this edition to kind of see, or this revision to kind of see what has changed. So here is our agenda for this video. I'm going to go over the like an overview of the class and what I believe the role of the core class is. Now, importantly, in this video, as with all the videos in this series, I'm not going to be discussing specific subclass features. Those will be done in future videos on those subclasses, but I will be talking about the general gist of what the subclass features do. Then we're going to talk about all the class features from level 1 to level 20. And I've broken this out into five level sections to make this easier. Then I'll talk very briefly about adapting old subclasses into the new rules. Importantly, there's only one real big change. Druids under the 2014 rules got their subclass at level 2. They now get it at level 3. Then I'll talk a little bit about multiclassing the Druid in 2024, or at least under the 2024 rules, as we are now in 2025. And then I'll kind of give a summary of the Druid class as a whole and give it some ratings in some key categories. All right, so class overview and role. The Druid is mainly a Wisdom primary full caster, much like the class that we covered in our last video in this series, the Cleric. Now, that said, the Druid is really an adaptable kind of jack of all trades. They can support, they can deal damage, they can provide control, and they're also reasonably durable. They also have really high utility. Now, one of the consequences of being able to be potentially good at a lot of these different things is they don't particularly excel in any one of them, although their out of combat utility is really, really high. They're also really adaptable, much like the Cleric. They're able to potentially swap out their entire spell list every long rest. Druid and Clerics are the only classes that can do this in a way that makes them forgiving, but in a way it also makes them a little bit more complex because a lot of Druid spells in particular are very situational. All right, here is the subclass feature table for the 2024 Druid. Yeah, there are some new things here, and I will be showing the class's spell slot progression on the slides as we go through. But the Druid class overall has seen pretty significant changes. I think an interesting thing to note is our number of prepared spells. I think this is basically going to be the same for all full casters. This is the same progression as both Bards and Clerics had. So first, let's look at what features are new. So everything I've boxed in here in green is a feature that has been added. So they've added Primal Order at level 1, Wild Resurgence at level 5, Elemental Fury at level 7, and Improved Elemental Fury at level 15. Primal Order is actually a lot like the Cleric's Divine Order, and we'll see that. And Wild Resurgence is a great thing to keep your kind of wild shape going. Now, in terms of things that have changed, these are all the things in blue, and there are a lot of things that have been changed here. So the whole wild shape use progression is new. It used to just be 2. Now it's potentially scales up to 4, and this is actually wrong. The 4 begins at level 10. So from level 10 to level 20, they get 4 wild shape uses. Yeah, their spellcasting has seen some slight changes a lot, and Wild Shape has seen some pretty significant ones, and their subclass now comes at level 3 instead of level 2. And then your Beast spells and Archdruid kind of class capstones have seen some pretty significant changes. All right, so let's jump into our discussion of their features from levels 1 to 5. So the primary ability of Druid is Wisdom. This has seen no changes. They have a D8 hit dice. They have Intelligence and Wisdom saving throw proficiencies. They are proficient in 2 skills off the following list: Arcana, Animal Handling, Insight, Medicine, Nature, Perception, Religion, and Survival. They are proficient with simple weapons. They get the Herbalism kit, and they're proficient in Light Armor and Shields. Now, importantly, one of the new things under the 2024 rules, Druids have lost their medium armor proficiency, at least that they get by default. Now, they will have a chance to get it back with a level 1 class feature. But another interesting thing here is, unlike in the 2014 Player's Handbook, there is no verbiage in the 2024 Player's Handbook that restricts Druids or potentially restricts them from using metal armor or shields. And I know a lot of DMs didn't necessarily limit druids that way, but a lot of them did. And under the 2024 rules, that is gone. So feel free to wear half plate armor on your druid that's made out of steel. All right. Now, as for their class features here, so the first one is Primal Order, and much like the Cleric's Divine Order, this gives you a choice at level 1 between two different things. So your first option is Magician. This gives you an extra cantrip from the Druid spell list, and you also get to add your Wisdom modifier to your Arcana and Nature checks. Now, one of the things that I've seen, at least with a lot of Druids, is that many Druid players will neglect proficiency in Arcana and Nature, even though those are something that Druids should thematically be good at, because they probably dumped their intelligence score. And Magician goes a long way towards fulfilling that fantasy and something that you would expect the character to have. The other option is Warden, and this gives your Druid proficiency with martial weapons and training with medium armor. So this is the way that you can get that medium armor proficiency back. And importantly, this is actually something that Druids didn't have access to before in terms of the martial weapons. And there's actually a decent argument using the right origin feats that you can actually build a Druid with this and be able to make weapon attacks with a reasonable amount of effectiveness as your at-will option. And this is kind of an archetype of builds that Druids haven't had before, and I'm curious to explore it and see how actually good it is compared to just say the cantrip casting route, and that is something that I may dive into on a future video. All right, next up at level 1 is Druidic. So what this does, we know the secret language of Druids, which is called Druidic. And we also have the Speak with Animals spell always prepared as part of this. This is new. Speak with Animals is really a thematic spell for Druids to have. And that said, a lot of Druids wouldn't waste a prep slot on it. So they said, if you should have it, you should have it. And now you get it all the time. I think that's great. And then you can also use Druidic to leave hidden messages. You were able to do this before. The only change here is that it now takes an investigation check for other people to find it. It used to be a perception check. Finally, at level 1, we get the Druid's spellcasting. Their spellcasting ability is Wisdom, and they can use a Druidic focus to get 2 cantrips to begin with, or 3 if you took Magician, and you can replace 1 per level up. Before, you could only swap them out at ability score increase levels, so 4, 8, 12, 16, and 19. They're prepared spells. They now get 4, and they follow that progression on the table from earlier in the slides. And you can swap out all of your prepared spells on a long rest. Now, importantly, it used to be your class level plus your Wisdom modifier. So generally speaking, you have fewer than before, especially as you get to high levels, but it's still a decent chunk. Their ritual caster feature is gone, but like with all casters, if a spell has the ritual tag, you can ritual cast it. So they didn't really lose anything, but other classes that weren't a ritual caster basically got a buff. A lot of Druid spells in general have undergone changes, including some of the potentially some of the more powerful ones from the 2014 rules that had some problems and problematic issues, namely the conjure spells like conjure animals and conjure woodland beings. That said, summon spells are probably still the Druid's best damage per round tool in terms of a concentration option. Their options, they have a lot of, they have some healing, they have support, and they have a lot of kind of area denial type controls spells, and then they have a lot of kind of concentration summon options and that kind of thing. For the most part, Druids have a lot of concentration options, but not a lot of single-use blasting type spells. All right, so next up is the Druid's Wild Shape at level 2, and this is a, okay, I need to delete this slide, let's skip it. All right, so the Druid's Wild Shape at level 2. So you get 2 uses per long rest, and you can recharge 1 use per short rest. Now, it used to be you all had 2 uses period, and you got them all back, so this is a slight nerf in that area. You also only know 4 forms, and your max CR at this level that you can turn into is a 1/4, and you can't pick anything that has a fly speed. Now, before it used to be like you could pick any beast that you had seen, and that was kind of DM fiat to kind of determine what you actually had. So I like the fact that they say, okay, this is how many forms you get, and you can swap out 1 form per long rest. So you can potentially kind of swap them out as you get to higher levels. It's also now a bonus action to activate your wild shape and shapeshift into a beast. It used to be a full action for everybody except for Moon Druid, so I think it's great that it's a bonus action now. It lasts a number of hours equal to half your Druid level, or it lasts until you use it again, you're incapacitated, or you die, and you can also leave early as a bonus action. Now, it used to also end when your temporary hit points you got from it went away, because you basically got all the beast hit points. That's gone. So you now only leave it if you die or if you want to, and that's a significant change. You can generally stay in wild shape longer. Now, the other things that you get when you shift, you get temporary hit points equal to your Druid level. And again, before you used to basically put the beast's stat block on over yours, and you would revert back into your human form when your beast's hit points were depleted. That doesn't happen anymore, but the number of hit points that you get is generally going to be much less. For anybody but a Moon Druid, it's going to be capped at 20 points. And many CR1 beasts have 20 plus hit points. You can actually get somewhere into the 2014 rules that have 45. That's a giant hyena. As for your game statistics, this is where wild shape gets kind of complicated. You get replaced by the beast stat block, but only partially. You keep your creature type, you keep your hit points, which that's a new thing. You keep your hit dice, you keep all of your mental ability scores, so your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. You keep your class features, you keep your languages, and you keep your feats. It is important they specify that you don't keep any features from your race. So, no more I'm a dragonborn, but I turn into a dire wolf, and I can breathe fire, and if I'm a gem dragonborn, I can give myself wings. You can't do that anymore. No racial features, but you still have the same things where you retain your skill proficiencies and gain the beast skills and that kind of thing. Additionally, you can't spellcast while in wild shape, so you can't cast spells, but shapeshifting doesn't break your concentration or otherwise interfere with a spell you've already cast. So importantly, if a spell has something you can do with a magic action on a future turn to do something, like call lightning, you can still do that. So this is basically the same as it was under the 2014 rules. Additionally, your ability to handle objects is determined by your form's limbs, and you can choose whether your equipment falls in your space, merges with your form, or is worn by it. However, worn equipment functions if the DM determines it's appropriate, and worn equipment won't change size or shape, and any equipment that merges or falls on the ground has no effect. And this is the same kind of object interaction rules there were before. One of the things that I really like about this new updated wild shape is the usefulness of a form you turn into is much more tied to that form's abilities and maybe its speed rather than its hit points. One of the things that you would do as a Moon Druid is you pick the best combat shape with a combination, thinking about its attacks, its hit points, and its armor class. That's not really going to be a thing anymore. Additionally, because of this, forms like a rat or an owl are just as durable as using other forms, at least in terms of the number of hit points they provide, because it's connected to your Druid level now instead. With these changes, I can potentially see Moon Druids actually shapeshifting in combat a lot more, especially if it gives them a way to keep themselves safe while maintaining a powerful concentration spell. Additionally, this kind of fixes some of the problems of low-level characters dipping into Druid, particularly Moon Druid, just to be able to turn into something really beefy. You can't do that anymore because the beefiness of your wild shape depends on your Druid level. So if you really want to leverage wild shape, you need to be mostly a Druid under the 2024 rules, and I think, honestly, that's a good thing. Additionally, at level 2, we get Wild Companion. This is a feature that was ported over from Tasha's, so we can summon a nature spirit that assumes an animal form to aid us. As a magic action, we can expend a spell slot or a use of Wild Shape to cast Find Familiar without any material components. It's a fey and disappears when you finish a long rest. Now, importantly, under the 2014 rules in Tasha's, you could only do this with a Wild Shape charge, and it only lasted as long as your Wild Shape would, so a number of hours equal to half your Druid level. But now that it's just until a long rest, I find this is much more streamlined, and I would absolutely, want a Wild Companion. I think this is a great feature for Druids to have. Moving on to level 3, we get our subclass now at this level. So the 4 subclasses available in the new player's handbook are the circles of the land, the moon, the sea, and the stars. The land is a pretty interesting one. They have they have 4 different subclass spell lists you can swap between. Moon is all about wild shape and improving it. Circle of the Sea is kind of about harnessing the power of the sea and the storms. There's some flight and swimming and that kind of thing there. And Circle of the Stars is basically adapted over from Tasha's. Circle of the Sea is the only one that's new here. Generally speaking, all of the subclasses have a subclass spell list, although the number of spells vary, and they have something special they can do with wild shape. They might use it to feel abilities, they might make it better, like in the case of the Moon Druid, but all of them give you another thing you can do with your wild shape. And yeah, that's about it for level 3. Moving on to level 4, we get a few improvements to our wild shape. Our number of known forms jumps from 4 to 6, and the maximum challenge rating jumps from 1/4 to 1/2. That increase in the number of known forms is new, as before there wasn't a limit. Now the ability score improvement, this hasn't really changed. They're on the standard ability score schedule, and again the level 19 feat is called an epic boon in the book, but it's essentially just a normal ability score improvement, as epic boons are a special category of feats that only have a prerequisite of character level 19. Moving on to level 5, in addition to 3rd level spells, druids get Wild Resurgence. And I love this feature. I think it's very powerful and something that can be easy to overlook. So what this does is once on each of our turns, if we have no uses of wild shape left, we can give ourselves one by expending a spell slot of any level without any action required. Additionally, we can expend one use of our wild shape, again, no action required, to give ourselves a level 1 spell slot once per long rest. Now the really cool thing here, even though we only have 2 uses of wild shape and recover 1 on a short rest, we can potentially use 1st level spell slots to give ourselves wild shape back, and potentially higher level ones as well. And one of the things with druids, again, a lot of their spells don't have a lot of non-concentration options that you might use to say blast enemies and that kind of thing. So one of the things I've found historically playing druids for me is I don't use very many spell slots per combat, even though I'm casting pretty powerful spells, because typically I'll cast a concentration spell, I'll try to maintain it, and then I'll occasionally throw out a heal, and most of the time I'm just firing off cantrips if I'm a ranged one, or if I'm a moon druid, I'm probably making attacks with my wild shape. I've found, at least from my experience, that as a druid, I have a lot of spell slots left over at the end of the day. There are things you can do with these, like manufacture good berries for the next day, but you should have plenty to basically be able to give yourself as many wild shapes as you want. And I see no reason why, once a druid is level 5 or beyond, they shouldn't have wild shape whenever they want it on demand. I don't think most tables play with a grueling enough encounter schedule that you would not be able to, have some spell slots left over to convert back into wild shape uses. So overall, a very powerful feature, and this one is very, very good, especially given that a lot of the subclasses need wild shape charges to feel their core abilities. So once you're a level 5 druid, you should have those available pretty much every combat. Moving on to level 6, we are now up to 3 wild shape charges per long rest, and we get our next subclass feature. Now the subclass features at this level are generally kind of a new thing that expands on the subclass identity, and they're usually pretty powerful. Generally speaking, for druids, when you get a subclass feature, it's really good. And yeah, like druid subclasses are very powerful and will typically feel very different from each other. At level 7, druids get Elemental Fury, and this is new. This is comparable to the feature that clerics got with their Blessed Strikes, but you get to choose one, and this choice will carry forward to an upgrade we'll see at level 15. So your 2 choices are Potent Spellcasting. You could add your Wisdom modifier to the damage you deal with any druid cantrip. So if you got a cantrip from another source, like say Magic Initiate, this would not work with that, but this will improve the damage of things like the druid's new Starry Wisp cantrip, or Produce Flame, or Thorn Whip, and that kind of a thing. The other option is Primal Strike. So what this one does is once on each of our turns, when you hit a creature with an attack roll with a weapon or a beast's form attack in wild shape, you can cause the target to take an extra 1d8 cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage, your choice, when you use the feature, and you can change it. So I could do fire damage one turn, cold damage the next. I think Primal Strike is very good, especially if you're going to be using that kind of wild shape attack, and also if you want to potentially go into that more martial oriented druid. I think those druids are probably going to be best off using Magic Initiate to get the True Strike cantrip, and then you can add the extra damage on top with this, so you have that additional source of scaling. You may not beat out just the basic. You'll probably be a little bit better on basic damage than a potent spell cast, and you could potentially get weapon masteries that way. So that's an interesting option to consider as a druid, and I think it makes Primal Strike have more value. Unlike with the cleric one, I feel like it's not as cut and dry with potent spellcasting being best, and which one is best really depends on what build you're doing, whether you're more into that caster or a little bit more martial / gish spell sword type character. Moving on to level 8, we get our second ability score improvement or feat, and we get our final improvements to our wild shape. So we now can have up to 8 forms known at a time. We can turn into up to a CR1 creature, and we can pick creatures that can fly. So from here on, flying druids with concentration spells are going to be a thing. If you're a DM and have a druid at least level 8, you should probably plan for this. You know, at this level, druids have 4th level spells, including the new very powerful conjure woodland beings, which functions a lot like a druid's version of the cleric's spirit guardian spell. It's very powerful. One of the things you can do with this is you can turn into an owl, which doesn't provoke opportunity attacks when it flies out of reach, and is very fast. And you can just zip around the battlefield and tag all the enemies, and then fly up in the air to potentially be safe from anything but ranged attacks. But even so, you'll be very durable because you still have all your druid hit points underneath, so your owl is still going to be very, very tanky. You would basically only have to leave the wild shape if you die or you need to recast another spell. So again, even if you're not a moon druid, I can potentially see you using wild shape a lot from here on out, just to shift into different forms for your own survivability. At level 9, druids don't get any class features other than 5th level spells, but 5th level spells for a full caster, especially druids, are very powerful. There's a lot of good kind of area denial and high utility options here. At level 10, we get our final bump to our number of wild shape charges, up to 4 uses per long rest, but again, we only get back 1 on a short rest. We get another subclass feature here, and they're typically, again, very strong and sometimes upgrade some of the previous features. Moving on to level 11, no features other than 6th level spells, so no changes there. Level 12, it's our 3rd ability score improvement, and our prepared spells don't go up and we don't get any new spell slots. This is kind of a sucky level for a lot of full casters under the 2024 rules, other than the fact that you get a feat. Moving on to level 13, no features again, but 7th level spells, which again are very powerful. So the last 3 levels, 11, 12, 13, haven't really had much exciting other than new spells and a feat. But that said, at level 14, we get our subclass Capstone. This is the level they got it before, but typically, again, the subclass Capstones of Druids are very good and worth getting in just about every case, especially if you're going to lean into the unique playstyles they offer. At level 15, we get improved elemental feature, elemental fury, and this is again a new feature. So our chosen option grows more powerful if we pick potent spell casting. When we cast a druid cantrip that has a range of 10 feet or more, the spell's range increases by 300 feet. So you can now throw it from 300 feet away, or 300, like I think it's 360 feet or something crazy like that. So basically, you can hit from across the map or from way up in the air, and if you're flying, and yeah, that's pretty interesting. Primal Strike is much simpler. It just bumps the extra damage up from 1d8 once per turn to 2d8, and I believe it's only on your turn that you can do that. Yeah, it's only on your turn. But again, either path is strong depending on if you're doing stuff with beast form or weapons, or if you're leaning more on that casting route. At level 16, it's our 4th ability score improvement or feat, and nothing else. At level 17, there are no features, but Druids now have access to their 9th level spells, which, again, are very powerful, although I wouldn't say they're necessarily as impactful as a wizard spells, but they are different. At level 18, Druids get beast spells. They also got a feature under the 2014 rules called Timeless Body. That feature has been removed here. It's more of a ribbon one, and it's been incorporated into the Druid's Capstone. What beast spells does is while using your wild shape, you can cast spells in beast form, except for any spell that has a material component with a cost specified or one that consumes its material component. So before, this didn't allow you to cast any spells that had a material component. It just said you could provide vocal and somatics. So that is a buff there. This is generally a very powerful feature in that, now your little druid that's an owl can be flying around and casting spells, and you can cast all of your spells, except for those specific ones. Again, very powerful, and I would think that most druids would probably be using wild shapes in combat all the time now at this level, because this feature is very good, unless they had a very specific feature that they wanted to cast. I think it's a bit of a shame that this comes so late in druid's progression. I feel like one of the core things of druid is shapeshifting. And it would be cool if this came at an earlier level, but it limited the number of the level of spells that you could cast in your wild shape as you got higher up. I think that would make for a more seamless experience, but at the same time, I can understand why they waited until here to do it, because it is very powerful to allow a druid to cast spells while they're a flying owl. So yeah, again, great feature. Moving on to level 19, it's the final ability score improvement or feat, and this is where the epic boons are now available, but there's no changes here otherwise. And finally, at level 20, it is the Druid's Capstone Archdruid. So there are 3 things here. The first one is Evergreen Wild Shape. When we roll initiative and have no uses of Wild Shape left, we can regain 1 expended use. At the surface, I don't think this is actually a very good feature. Because we have Wild Resurgence, we should be able to get back our wild shapes whenever we want. So I kind of doubt we would ever not have them available. That said, if we, you might not be getting them back until you were in combat anyway. So this could give you, save some of those first level spell slots. So that's kind of helpful. But in the light of the next feature, it is a little better. So the next feature is called Nature Magician, and this is new. It says that you can convert wild shape uses into a spell slot, no action required. You choose a number of unexpended wild shape uses and convert them into a single spell slot with each wild shape use contributing 2 spell levels, and you can do this once per long rest. So at this level, we have 4 potential wild shape uses. So we can make a level 2 spell, a level 4 spell, a level 6 spell, or a level 8 spell slot. So this is, I would say, this is an extra 8th level spell slot. That's very powerful. You can potentially say convert 4 first level spell slots into an 8th level spell slot by using Wild Resurgence. And I think this is actually very powerful, and it actually makes Evergreen Wild Shape look a little better, because if you're going to make a high level spell slot with your Nature Magician, you're going to want that Evergreen Wild Shape to kind of potentially give you those back a little bit. I think this is a great feature. It doesn't kind of seem so as much, but again, that's an extra 8th level spell slot that you have to think about. And finally, they get a longevity feature, which is Timeless Body from level 18 in the 2014 Druid, which says you basically age at 1/10 the normal rate. Your body only ages 1 year every 10 years. Now, overall, this is a bit of a total rework of the Archdruid feature. It used to give you unlimited wild shapes, and it let you ignore all vocal, somatic, and material components except for ones that were costed or consumed. Now, both of those things are actually quite overpowered. Having unlimited wild shapes, especially if you were a moon druid, was very problematic at level 20, because the druid would basically refresh like 150 hit points every turn by turning into a mammoth or turning into like a big elemental and that kind of a thing. Also, when a spell is cast without any components at all, there is no indication that a spell is being cast. So things that trigger, say, when you see a spell being cast, like counterspell, don't work because there's no wind up on the spell at all. It just goes off. Both of those things about Archdruid were pretty problematic, and I think this rework was kind of required to fix those. Overall, I like the changes to this. I think they've basically addressed the issues that the Druid Capstone had, namely the unlimited wild shapes was pretty silly. All right, so let's move on to talking about adapting old subclasses. And this is going to be very brief. It's really easy. So you can use an older, unupdated subclass. Generally speaking, here's how you're going to do it. You don't get your subclass until level 3, and you get all the features your subclass would have gotten up to that point, such as your subclass spells and other class features. Now, it is important, there is one subclass that does not port over well to the 2024 rules, and it hasn't worked very well for a while, and that is the Shepherd Druid out of Xanathar's. It just hasn't worked. It just doesn't work very well with the new summon spells that don't have hit dice, and also the main spells it wanted to use, like conjure animals and that kind of thing, have been completely reworked. So I wouldn't use Shepherd Druid at all in a 2024 game. I would avoid it unless your DM wants to homebrew it for you. I suspect that class will get reworked very soon, and they'll probably post a new version of it. All right, let's talk about multi-classing the Druid. So the minimum stat requirement you need to multi-class into Druid, if it's not your first class, is 13 Wisdom, or the minimum you need to take a level outside of Druid is you need to have that 13 Wisdom. The proficiencies that you get if you take a level in Druid and it's not your first class are light armor and shields. Now before it also used to give you medium armor, but remember you can get the medium armor proficiency if you pick Warden as your primal order at Druid 1. Now, in my opinion, Druid multi-classes best with Sorcerer and Wizard. These are the same classes I recommended under the 2014 rules, and allow me to explain. So, for a character that's mostly a Druid, a level or 2 of these classes offers a lot of defensive and utility spells that Druids lack, namely things like Shield and potentially Silvery Barbs if your table allows that spell. You can also potentially use something like Mage Armor, which will carry an effect through to your Wild Shape form to enable you to have a higher armor class, as it'll set your armor class to 13 plus your Dexterity. That said, the Druid's Barkskin spell has improved, and that carries over into Wild Shape as well, and the new one no longer requires concentration, so you may just be using that spell instead if you're not a Moon Druid who now has a feature that buffs their AC. That said, a feat like Magic Initiate Wizard can get a Druid the Shield spell, and that's absolutely an option, and I don't think you really necessarily need to take either of these levels. If you're going to be mostly the other class, Druid potentially offers these classes armor and shields, potentially medium armor, and some healing abilities and kind of buff options, as well as the potential utility of Wild Shape if you take 2 levels. You can also get medium armor this way through your primal order. Now, as for other classes it can work with, I think it works pretty darn well with Cleric. I've done a build on that that uses Tempest Cleric that I adapted, and you can see a link to that up there. I will share that. It also works pretty well with Fighter. It can work well with Monk, and as well as Ranger and Rogue. These are kind of all of the other wisdom-based or dexterity-based kind of centric classes, and this group, including Druid, can multi-class with each other pretty well. Some of these classes potentially like the armor, some of them like the spells, and wisdom is probably your most desirable general mental stat. So it's pretty easy to meet a requirement to become a Druid. If you're a more martial-oriented Druid, you can potentially get extra attack from Fighter, Monk, or Ranger, or you can get armor and weapon proficiencies from one of these and skip the Warden Primal Order and get Magician instead. Another cool thing that I talked about in that other build as well, and I've talked about a little bit here, the new Cleric has a feature that can stack with Primal Order Magician called Divine Order Thaumaturge, so you can potentially get double your Wisdom modifier to your Arcana checks, which is pretty cool. That said, much like the Bard, if you're going to be playing a Druid, whether it's a pure class or not, well, Druid really likes being the main class, especially because of how well your Wild Shape scales with your Druid level. You don't get as much out for just a few levels like you did before. Also, I don't really mind missing the new Archdruid now. It's really good with that basically extra 8th level spell slot, but it's not like you lose out on unlimited hit points with unlimited Wild Shapes anymore. As for other classes, you can really take advantage of some of the out-of-combat abilities and utility that Druid can provide, especially Wild Shape. You can turn into a rat and crawl into places, and you're just as durable as you would have been before. I think Rogue Druid, even though it's not particularly mechanically powerful in combat, has a lot of really cool kind of infiltration ways it can contribute in that pillar of play. All right, finally, let's summarize and talk about some ratings of the Druid. So first up is offense, and I give the Druid a 3 out of 5. This is the same as I gave it under the 2014 rules. I'm going to say, actually, arguably, the new Druid does a little bit more damage than the old Druid does. Although some of the summon spells have been nerfed, I think that's good and fair for the health of the game, especially considering a lot of those summon spells made your turns take a long time. Your at-will damage is is noticeably higher with the new Druid thanks to Elemental Fury. And I think that's something that is really nice and kind of helps the Druid feel like they're contributing at higher levels of play without being forced into Wild Shape or Moon Druid, which was pretty much, a lot of people felt that was the best subclass by a long way under the 2014 rules. I now feel like you can do well with any Druid subclass. They were all really good before, but Moon Druid was so like S tier that it was kind of hard not to pick a Moon Druid. Next up is defense, and again, I give the Druid a 3 out of 5, and this is the same as I gave them under the 2014 rules. I think their defense is arguably a little bit better, again, thanks to being a little bit easier for you to use Wild Shape in combat for most Druids, even if you're not a Moon Druid. Although it's not a big enough change, I think it's worth justifying a bump up to 4 stars. Next up is control, and I give the Druid a 4 out of 5 here. I gave them a 3 in 2014. I honestly think I was wrong there. I think they're a much better controller than a cleric, which is one I gave a 3 star. That said, Druid spells generally focus on area denial, like things like Spike Growth, Wall of Stone, that kind of thing, and they are very good at area denial. That said, they lack a lot of the best hard control options a class like a sorcerer or a wizard provides. Think things like Hypnotic Pattern and Hold Monster and that kind of thing. So while they might not be as good as hard controlling a single monster, they are usually pretty good at at providing a little bit softer control over a large area on a lot of enemies. Next up is support, and this is kind of their ability to help and boost their allies, and I give the Druid a 5 out of 5 here. I know I also gave the Bard a 5 out of 5. I think the Bard is a stronger 5 than the Druid is, but that said, some of the Druid's spells are absolutely ridiculous when it comes to support and utility. For example, if you're playing kind of a hex crawl travel type campaign, as soon as the Druid hits the level where they get Windwalk, it basically trivializes all of that, and you can basically fly places wherever you want. So the big thing with Druid support, it's not really baked into their class features so much as it's baked into their spells. Their spell list is amazing for this kind of stuff. Next up is skills, and I give the Druid a 4 out of 5. This is the same I gave them under the 2014 rules. This is namely because their spells are incredible, and their Wild Shape is also incredible for anything that involves infiltration or exploration. That pillar really belongs to Druids, I think. It's something that they are incredible at, and they can also potentially boost social characters with things like guidance or enhance ability. So Druids, while they might not have a particular dedicated niche in combat, out of combat, if you prepare the right spells, you're a god. Finally, complexity, and this is a rating of how difficult it is to play the character. So a low complexity rating is an easy character to play, and a high complexity rating is hard. Now, the complexity rating is also generally tied to the number of decisions you have to make, whether it's in character creation or spell preparation, or the number of different things you can pick in combat. And I think Druids are probably one of the most complex, if not the most complex classes. A lot of their spells take a decent amount of understanding of the game to use. A lot of them are very situational. And I think Wild Shape is probably the single most complicated feature in the game, as it basically requires you to make a hybrid stat block whenever you use it, and it has a lot of different additional rules that you need to remember and consider. All right, so thanks for watching. This has been our summary of the Druid class in 2024. Overall, I really like the changes that Wizards of the Coast made to the Druid class. Wild Shape had a lot of clunkiness and power level issues, especially early and late. In the middle, it felt pretty meh. But at the beginning, Moon Druid in like the first 2 to 4 levels of the game is incredibly powerful, and then Moon Druid at level 20 is incredibly powerful. And I feel like what they've done with the new Wild Shape has helped even that out a bit. That said, I don't think we can really fully assess how good Druid in general and Moon Druid especially is until we have access to the new monster manual, which should be pretty soon. Once I get my hands on the new monster manual, I am planning on doing a Moon Druid video once I'm able to see all the beasts. Yeah, overall, I actually really like the changes they made to Wild Shape. I think it's very good for the health of the game. I think Elemental Fury is a welcome addition to improve the at-will damage of the class, which was really poor before. And I think, yeah, it helps a lot. Additionally, I feel like Primal Order and Origin feats have really opened up a lot of potential options for play, and you can do a lot more with a Druid than just walk around and cast spells. I think you can give serious consideration to making weapon attacks now, and then you can kind of be like this nature warrior. So our next class overview is going to be on fighter. Once again, my name is Nathan, and I will see you then.